welcome to my YouTube channel. I do videos focused on motherhood and lifestyle. So if this interests you, then please be sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications so you can be notified whenever I post a new video. Today's video is going to be a recap on my planned cesarean that I recently had, and so I'm gonna basically discuss, why I had to have the C-section and also what happened on the day of the procedure. So let's get started. So a little background about me is that this was my second pregnancy. My first pregnancy ended in an emergency C-section, and so this would not have been the first time that I would have had to go through and recover from a C-section, but this one was a little different for me because with my first pregnancy I actually labored a little bit, and it was an emergency procedure because my daughter turned out to be in distress. What happened is that her heart rate kept fluctuating below the normal level, and so eventually my doctor decided that it would probably be best for us to have the C-section, especially considering that I was only about, I think, 2 or 3 centimeters dilated. And so the length of time, obviously, that it may have taken for me to become fully dilated, it may have posed a risk to the baby. And so at the end of the day, we decided that that was probably the best route to go. But with this particular one, I ended up going under general anesthesia, so I wasn't even awake. And I can't really tell any details about the actual procedure. The only thing I would be able to talk about would have been the recovery. So like I said earlier, this video today is going to talk about this particular planned C-section and what actually happened during the scheduled surgery. With this second pregnancy, my doctor and I actually decided that I was going to go for a VBAC, vaginal birth after cesarean, at the beginning of my pregnancy. And so I was actually on course for it. I had already registered and everything at my hospital to come in for a normal birth, and they had me all set to go with that. But it turns out around week 30, in the 7th month. Yeah, it turns out in the 7th month that my doctor decided to do an ultrasound just to make sure everything was okay with the baby. And with my first, it turned out that the cord was around her neck, so he wanted to see if the cord placement was okay with this particular baby. So he checked the ultrasound, and it actually turned out that the cord was wrapped around the baby twice. But he still said that we can still work toward going for the VBAC. It's just that if by week 37, when he did another ultrasound, the cord was still wrapped twice, then we would have to go and schedule the C-section because he would prefer to not have me go into spontaneous labor, I guess, obviously, so we don't want to pose any risk to the baby. And so long story short, we get to week 37 and the cord is still wrapped twice around the baby. And so that is where I had to actually, that particular day after my visit with him, we decided to schedule the C-section, and I went and met with the anesthesiologist the following weekend to get signed up with him so he could be on call for when we went in to have the surgery done. So my appointment was scheduled for 6 a.m. in the morning. And the first thing that I did when I got to the hospital was that the nurses started to prep me for the procedure. And her prep work included taking urine samples and having someone come in to draw blood. The reason they draw blood was just to cross-check my blood type with all the blood work that I had previously done, just to make sure that in the event something happened and I needed to get a blood transfusion, they would have what they needed right there in that instance. And also, she monitored the baby for about 30 minutes, and so she hooked me up to the monitor, and you can see where I was having contractions, the baby's heartbeat and movement and whatnot. So everything looked good, and while she was doing that, I had to sign my consent forms before I went in to actually have the procedure done. Typically as well, they would normally shave you, but in this instance, I didn't have to be shaved because I already had my hair removed, so I didn't have to get that particular thing done. So after I was done with the nurse, I went into the back with the anesthesiologist, and in his prep room, he put in my butterfly clip where they would have attached the IV. And so obviously I had that in the whole time that I was in the hospital. And then he took me into the back in the theater, and we started the process for the epidural. Now, like I said, with my first pregnancy, I didn't have an opportunity to get an epidural. I went under general anesthesia. So this was a completely new experience for me, and I must say that I was always worried about the whole epidural process, and I guess it's because I had never looked into it. I had always thought to myself that I'm gonna have vaginal births and everything is gonna go fine. I'm not gonna get an epidural. I'm just gonna do it the natural way, and that's final. But it didn't work out that way for me. And so, like I said, with the epidural, I was a little emotional and a little nervous all at the same time. But I will admit that in talking through the process with the anesthesiologist, he provided me with a great level of comfort, and he answered any questions and concerns that I may have had even before he went in to go and do the epidural. So on the day of, when we were in the theater, as he was going through each step, he would walk me through it and tell me what he was going to do. And so I already knew what I should expect and how I should be feeling. And he essentially would tell me, okay, you're going to feel a little bit of numbness. It's going to be a quick stick. You may feel a little shock. Let me know where it is, what happens. And so as he was doing the epidural, he was great with letting me know what he was doing next, the step-by-step process with each thing. And there was also a nurse in there with him as well, who was in the front of me while he was behind me, making sure that I was positioned properly and keeping still so that I guess it wouldn't pose a risk to what he was actually doing. And during the process, he was pretty good with telling me what to expect and what I should be feeling. And so even in terms of the numbness, any shock activity that I may have experienced, wherever it may have been, he was asking me questions in terms of how I was feeling, and so I could give him the feedback and let him know exactly what was happening. But I will say, I think the epidural process for me was pretty seamless, and I did not feel any side effects from it after the fact. I think initially the stick, it wasn't painful to me, and I always thought that this is gonna hurt going into my back, but it wasn't a big deal to me at all. And I guess because of the way he did it and the distraction of the other nurse there talking to me during the whole process, it just made it go much smoother for me. So after the anesthesiologist was done and he made sure that the epidural was working fine, my doctors came in and I got all set for the procedure to start. And I was happy also with this one because obviously when you get the epidural, then you can have somebody come in the room with you. So my husband was able to come in and he was able to be there while they were performing the surgery. And also with this one, we were able to get pictures as well. And so we have some footage that we can now show our son after the fact once he gets a little older. And I was kind of disappointed that with my daughter, we didn't have an opportunity to get any footage, but like I said, with this one we were able to take pictures, and so that was a positive note for me with having this particular procedure done, even though it wasn't a natural birth that I was hoping for. But either way, once my doctor came in, I was numb. I didn't feel anything majorly during the procedure. There was a little bit of tugging, a little bit of pulling, but for me, like I said, it wasn't very painful. and I don't know if it's just because I didn't really think about it, or I didn't know what level of pulling and tugging to expect, because you know, people always tell you the different stories about how you may feel some pressure, some pulling and whatnot, but it wasn't too bad to me. It wasn't anything I couldn't handle, and obviously I'm guessing it was the result of the epidural, and so I'm thankful for that. But after that, once the doctor had cut me open and they started to take the baby out, when he came out crying, and we were just so grateful and thankful. And in that moment I felt extremely blessed, you know, to actually be awake to see it done, even though it didn't go the way that I would have wanted it to. Either way, it was fine for me. I mean, obviously we planned it, and so having a healthy and happy child is what's the most important thing to me, and that is exactly what we got. So after the procedure was done, they took me into recovery for I think about an hour. I was just in the back, and during this time I guess the epidural would have started to wear off, but I had also started to get my IVs as well. And so shortly thereafter, once I went out from the recovery, I went into my room where I'd be staying in the hospital, and I actually ended up being in the hospital for about a total of 2.5 days. We stayed 2 nights, and then the third day we came out, like I guess around 1 or 2 in the afternoon. And like I said, with everything that's going on with COVID-19, the coronavirus, I am so thankful that we were able to get this done prior to the brunt of everything happening, because at least my husband was able to come and visit me in the hospital. But I think now, at the rate that the hospital is in, you can hardly have any visitors. And so I'm thankful that I was able to get that done prior to the whole big frenzy related to this, and so that we could also be home and out of harm's way as it relates to the virus. But while I was in the hospital, the nurses every day, what they did for me as I was recovering, on day 1 my doctor actually kept me on a liquid diet, so I didn't have any solid foods the whole day. I think the only thing I had to technically eat during that day would have been a soup that he would have authorized him to give me in the late evening prior to me going to bed. But other than that, I would have just been on medications and liquids through the IV. And so that first day, obviously I was just in the bed the whole time. But on the morning of the second day, the nurses came in, and once they had cleaned me up, they had me get up and they had me start to take my first steps. And for anybody who's ever had a C-section or any type of abdominal surgery, you know that these first initial steps, your body just feels like, oh my god, what happened? Like, it's such a crappy feeling. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, those first few steps, they can be really painful. It just feels like everything could just, like, I don't know, maybe fall out of you or something to that effect. But during the day, they told me that the more I walk, the better I would get. And I do agree that walking really does help with the recovery, especially on that second day, because even when you try to move and sit up, turning from one side to the next, your abdominal muscles and everything is just so sore from the baby being in there and from them taking out the baby, that any type of movement, any coughing, any sneezing, anything that results in you using your abdominal muscles can be really, really painful. And so I found that initially when I got up to walk, I was a little crouched over in fear of having to face that initial feeling of standing up straight, but eventually I would have gotten through that. And so on that second day, I was allowed to eat, and in addition to my regular painkillers and the antibiotics that I would have been on through the IV, they also gave me a blood thinner in my stomach just to make sure that I wasn't getting any blood clots. And now that I think about it, I actually got the blood thinners all 3 days that I was there. And like I said, because you're hardly moving due to the surgery, they want to make sure that you don't get any blood clots. And so the blood thinner that they would have given me, they shot it directly into my stomach. And then on the final day that we were there, it was more or less just making sure that I was strong enough to walk around and that breastfeeding and everything was going fine with the baby. And so the pediatrician came in to see him all 3 days that we were there, and she confirmed that he was also okay for release. And so we both got discharged at the same time, and we didn't have any issues as it relates to us. The biggest thing was that he needed to get a little bit of sunlight because he was getting a little bit over the level where they like the newborns to be as it relates to jaundice. So we just had to get him some sunlight, but he didn't have to stay in the hospital to go under the lights. And so yeah, that was pretty much my C-section story. Like I said, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was gonna be, and it was better for me this time than the last time at the emergency with my daughter, especially considering that I could take pictures and whatnot. And obviously the recovery is a little bit more difficult from a vaginal birth, but with time, obviously, as with everything, you heal and you can recover and get back to the peak level that you may have been prior to pregnancy, as if you did have a vaginal birth. So you still get to experience the joys of giving birth, although it's a little different from what you may have done vaginally. But at the end of the day, healthy baby is the #1 priority, and so that is what we always strive for. If you enjoyed today's video, please hit the like button and obviously leave me any comments down below and I will respond back to you. If you've had a C-section, let me know what your experience was like and how you managed through it. I know the postpartum period, that 4th trimester, can be the big ringer for us as we try to adjust to mom life all over again. But it is joyous and we do enjoy it, no matter how difficult it may be for us at the outset. So reminder to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications if you're interested in seeing more content from me. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.